Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the second day of Catalyst Chats. Myself, Leah Rachel Nanan, the Chief Finance Officer of Catalyst IEDC MDCAT. Catalyst Chats is a joint initiative by the Innovation and Entrepreneurship Development Center, IEDC, and Institution Innovation Council, IIC, of Mar Basilius College of Engineering and Technology. Through this initiative, we reach out to the aspiring entrepreneurs out there in one platform, exchanging ideas, sharing their experience, where we get to learn a lot of things. Today, we are really happy to have Mr. Ashwin Panikar, the founder and CEO of One App, as our guest for today. Mr. Ashwin Panikar is a technocrat turned entrepreneur. He started his career as an architect and then became an urban transit specialist and now is a tech entrepreneur. He has been an executive architect with the government of Singapore and now he leads One, a platform for small enterprises to connect with community of customers. Welcome, sir, to Catalyst Chats.
Thank you, Leah.
We're so happy to have you on board, sir.
Thank you.
So before moving on to the session, we would like to inform the audience out there that if you have any questions you wish to ask, you can drop those questions down at the YouTube chat box and we will be considering them if the time permits. So once again, thank you. Welcome all of you to the second day of Catalyst Chats. And now we are moving on to the session. Sir, the platform is all yours.
Thank you, Leah. So maybe this is where I start sharing my screen, right?
Yes.
Okay. Just give me 1 second while I'm doing that. Please tell me when you can see it.
Yes, sir, it's visible.
Right. So good morning, everyone. So before I start again, thank you so much to Mar Basilius IEDC for inviting me to the session to speak to you guys, and it's an inspiration for myself, and I find it as an honor. So today's session, I like to call it as a session on 7 superpowers of an entrepreneur. Now, what should you be expecting from this session? I would start by saying what you should not expect, right? So today, from this session, you're not going to take home any complicated theories in business. You're not going to go into deep insights of case studies around the world. And certainly, you're not going to acquire any new superpower and you can't expect to fly back home on your own wings. I think to learn to fly and all those kind of stuff, I think that is where you should be looking up to your professors in your college, right? But for me, I'm not a professor. I'm not an academician. And my tryst with business school lasted only about 6 to 8 months, right? But what I can take you through are the lessons I have learned from my own journey. And so when I was asked to speak on the session, and so my expectation of this crowd, and I hope I'm right, is a crowd of youngsters who are about to start their journey as a professional, many of you probably are also thinking about a journey as an entrepreneur. Some of you might already be an entrepreneur. So to this crowd, I'm hoping to throw some light on some of the very core abilities that an entrepreneur should have. And I believe a true entrepreneur would have. Now, these are abilities which one may have inherently in them, or they may develop along the way as they go on their journey as an entrepreneur. But one thing is for sure, all entrepreneurs, in my opinion, will have these abilities or superpowers that will make them a successful entrepreneur. So sit back and relax. This is going to be probably 40 to 45 minutes. And I hope, like Leah mentioned, after which you probably you will ask me a lot of questions. So start with, who is an entrepreneur? I'm sure all of you will have some sort of definition, right? Some of you are already an entrepreneur. But the simplest definition that you can find, dictionary has a, this dictionary has an innate ability to make very complicated things sound very simple, simplifying the most confounding things, right? So if you take any dictionary, this is probably what you will see. A person who sets up a business taking on financial risks in the hope of profit. Is that definition correct? Is entrepreneurship as simple as it sounds? If you ask any entrepreneur, this is probably he would define entrepreneurship as rolling a massive burden uphill against all odds. But if you ask someone else who is not an entrepreneur but is looking at entrepreneurs, then this is probably what he would define as entrepreneur as. Master of all trades, trying to juggle as many things as possible with a vision that only he understands, and he's always in chase of profit and value. In my opinion, entrepreneurs are much more than that. He is someone who has attained a certain sense of being. Entrepreneurship is almost like an inner calling. Now, I would think that some of you might be even, somebody else can force you to marry someone you do not like. Some of you might be even forced to fight in a military, in an army, to defend a nation against your will sometimes. And hell, some of you might be taking the course that you're taking because somebody else forced you to take the course, and you probably might be absolutely hating it. But one thing about entrepreneurship is no one can force you to become an entrepreneur. That is one call only you can make. If at some point someone was forced to become an entrepreneur, he went through the journey, then that is certainly not entrepreneurship. I would think that as another form of a job. But I think there has to be a differentiation. This is something which I find when I speak to youngsters, I find that a lot of them have a misinterpreted idea of what an entrepreneurship. They equate it with businessmen. There is certainly a difference between a businessman and an entrepreneur. I mean, I think this is a very famous graphic, and many of you would have seen it already. But again, for the propriety of this session, I would explain businessman is someone who takes a product or service. He has some value to it. He pays certain price for it, adds a profit to it, and sells it. And this is like probably all the shops that you would see around. Practically most of our IT companies in Technopark and elsewhere in our state and in the country mostly run on the same principle. Basically, they take a service or product, add a profit to it, and sell it to somebody else. But entrepreneurship is slightly different. What an entrepreneur does is he finds something, a product, and then he extracts a value out of it, and then he sells it at a much higher profit. Now that is very different. But for this session, I would like to call upon definitions of entrepreneurship coined by MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, Sloan School of Business. So in one of their courses in title Disciplined Entrepreneurship, they define two kinds of entrepreneurship, right? One of them, they call it as SME, small medium enterprise, and another one is IDE, innovation driven enterprise. Now, SMEs are companies who generally have a narrow focus, a smaller market focus, like a local focus. These are your dry cleaners, your restaurants, your utility services, etc. And typically, these companies would probably take a smaller investment to be done to start a business, and it would also probably have a shorter gestation period. And it would most certainly have a linear growth. It'll have a linear growth, but at some point it will plateau. It will be capped. That's the SME kind of entrepreneurs. IDE, on the other hand, innovation-driven enterprise, would require larger investment and a longer gestation period. But eventually, it would have an exponential growth and sometimes even uncapped. Now, who are these? These are your typical SaaS products, your Zohos of the world, your Flipkarts of the world, your pharmaceuticals of the world, and the likes. And I would like to believe my own venture one have an exponential growth in times to come. But regardless of what entrepreneurship that you run, your abilities or powers of the entrepreneur remains the same. And in today's discussion, I think I would focus mostly on points that would be relevant to the IDE sector of entrepreneurship. Now, to tell you all of this, you might ask, who am I? What is the credibility that I have? I think it is important for me to tell you a brief history of my journey so that there is some credibility to my claims later on. So I started as an architect. I graduated from the College of Engineering, Trivandrum in '93, and I started as an architect. And my first venture was my architectural practice, which I established in '94 with 3 employees and 1 major project in hand. First couple of years were really terrible. It was a complete struggle. But also, those were my initial years where I learned the first lessons in entrepreneurship. When I learned the lessons of carrying the burden of being an entrepreneur, the burden of responsibility of being an entrepreneur, responsibility of, say, like ensuring your employees are paid on time because their lives depend on you and the decisions you make. And although I couldn't still define in simple words what those meant, I learned during those years all about the fundamentals like cash flow statements, profit and loss, etc. And most importantly, one of the most important quality that every business and every entrepreneur should have is to keep your customers happy. So in 1998, along with my architectural practice, I picked up a carrying and forwarding agency, a CNF agency from one of the large corporates in the country. And I believed it had every potential to grow really big and become a major player in the business, in the building material product industry in the state. Yet, that venture failed in less than a year. And around the age of 27, 28, it pushed me to almost bankruptcy. I survived only because of my strong architectural practice. But in that journey, I learned a lot of lessons again. So one of the lessons that I learned is the difference between selling a service and a product. The difference between the brand as a person or designer, which is essentially me, versus the brand as a product, the product I was selling to the market. And it taught me about the finer details of logistics, your distribution channels, etc., and so on and so forth. Anyway, long story. In 2000, I left the country and I changed my career path to become a sort of an urban transit specialist. And I became a civil servant. And for the next decade or so, I was a civil servant or technocrat with two of the most progressive governments in the world, one in Singapore and other one in Dubai. This period was a period of incredible exposure for me to the best corporate companies in the world, because all the best corporate companies were in one way or the other consulting for us or working for us. And I was exposed to this, and I also, the exposure into that corporate world was from a position of advantage, a position of power and finance at your disposal. I also could travel the world a lot, and eventually it opened my eyes wide and far. In 2009, again, an entrepreneurship bug bit me, and I took an opportunity to invest and become a co-founder with a startup in Singapore that traded in fabrics. Here, my role was to strategize in growth, implement processes, and et cetera, et cetera. And eventually, along with my partner, we saw an incredible growth touching a couple of $1 million in a couple of years. I divested from this business to start another startup in the travel tech space in 2013. And that was also my first venture into the IT space. So moving into a completely new knowledge domain, the learning curves were really steep. Losses were real, very high. But eventually we had the graph going up in a couple of years. And when the entrepreneurship Cupid struck me again, and this time it was for one, which I believe is set for exponential growth. And that's where I'm right now. So you see in all this, in the talk today, you would see that, my experience is I've been on both sides of the two different kinds of entrepreneurship, right? Being on the SME side and the IDE side. And these are the lessons that I learned. So what superpowers should I have? So what superpowers should entrepreneurs have? Do I have any superpowers? Maybe, maybe not. But essentially, every entrepreneur will have superpowers developed, and I will take you through 7 of them. The first one is that he can fly. He can really fly high. An entrepreneur should be able to soar above all the clutter, the clouds, all the things that masks things. He can fly at 40,000 feet. He can fly higher than anyone else in his enterprise. He is the one to see how wide and far the horizon is. He should have the ability to look further than anyone else in his organization and anyone closer to the ground. An entrepreneur at any point in time will have a complete overview of his company. He should have complete overview of his company. He should have the vision and mission statements very clear. He should know that very well. He should understand the legal structure of his enterprise, history of the company, legacy of the company. He should know his competitors, the far and near competitors. He should know very well his own management team. He should know their synergy and how well they work amongst each other. All of this attributes to the farsightedness of a leader. And farsightedness in a leader, as Erica Anderson would say, she is one of the leading authors on leadership. And she would say that farsightedness in a leader is the ability to envision and articulate a successful future in a compelling and inclusive way. Now, the key word here being in inclusive. The reason being, it is not just about able to fly high and see the vision and far and see far the potential that he has, but it is also the ability to bring that vision and articulate to other people, which is the inclusive nature of it. And that inclusion includes not just the stakeholders, not just as investors, it also includes the customers, which means his vision, which includes you as a customer. So it is it is an ability in the entrepreneur that would allow him to take the business forward. We know people like this. We know entrepreneurs like this who can fly at 40,000 feet and really see far. Steve Jobs probably is one of the best examples that you can relate to. Next, superpower. He can dive. He can dive really deep. The ability to soar high and dive deep are complementary. What you call as the macro and the micro vision. Macro vision is the ability to fly high. Micro is the ability to dive deep. Micro vision, or attention to detail, is a very crucial skill for entrepreneurs because it is a source of insight. The greatest insight comes from our ability to observe, pay attention, and connect the dots much more clearly than anyone else can. In other words, it is also the ability for an entrepreneur to understand the core of one's business. Like I said, I mean, I ventured into IT and I learned my lessons the real hard way because I wasn't able to dive deep fast enough. And eventually I had to, and I learned my lesson, right? An entrepreneur should dive deep enough to know the details of his business so that he can leverage the best of it. It doesn't mean that he can become an expert in every aspect of his business. That is it is almost impossible. So he would need his team who are experts in doing different parts of the business, but then he should have enough knowledge to leverage the best out of his team. Leaving your team to cross the T's and dot the I's may be good, but then you should also know how to do that and to ensure that they're doing the right thing. Attention to detail is not about spelling. It is not about getting your grammar right, because that is attention to detail, but it does not simply means getting small things right. Sometimes small errors could be very costly. To bring you a perspective into that, I would relate to one of the iconic entrepreneurs that we all know in this generation, Elon Musk, who is arguably the most visionary entrepreneur that exists today. And he has been compared to some of the great legends in the history, right from Thomas Alva Edison and so forth. And he has at several times said that he follows certain 3 principles that makes an entrepreneur great. And one of the first principles that he follows is the understanding the fundamental principles of his business. So what he says is, like, if your enterprise is a jungle, you have to make sure that you understand the fundamental principles of knowing what makes a jungle, the trees, and even to the details of the trees and the big branches. And before you get into the details of, the final end unit of that, maybe the tree, maybe the leaves and the fruits, etc. But those are details that your experts might be able to take care of. But then you should understand the fundamental principles of it. So in other words, you should deep dive. My favorite superpower: an entrepreneur should have X-ray vision. Because he will be looking at the same walls as everyone is, but he can see through them. What I mean by that is he would have insight. Sometimes it is also called as an intuition. Science would tell you that intuition, or we sometimes refer it as gut feelings, are nothing but the results of your observation, your ability to analyze available information or data and come up with possible results that may not be easily visible. This is important because businesses will come up with stone walls on a daily basis. Some will be big, some will be small, but there will be problems every day. And an entrepreneur will have to navigate, as a captain of a ship, these obstructions with his ability to maneuver around these blind spots without putting his ship to risk or damaging his ship. Now, how does he do that? He relies on data, he relies on information, he puts them all together, and then he makes educated guesses. He evaluates the risks that he needs to take, and he comes up with risk mitigation methods. And he looks at the known unknowns, he looks at the unknown unknowns, etc. And these are very critical. Sometimes what you call or an analysis could start with a simple question of how did we do this? How are we doing this? Can we do it in a different way? Is this safe to do that? Can we take some more risks? I mean, sometimes it's just asking questions about the obstructions that you may have, foresee the obstructions that you could have, and then navigate. So this is one of the popular methodology of risk mitigation and process flow of how businesses would tackle problems. And if when you look at the chart, you will see that on the right-hand side, you will see that moves towards innovation, right? Because the more innovative your business is, the more unknown unknowns you deal with. Innovative businesses will be dealing with unknown unknowns because no one has done that before. Nobody has taken that path, and he wouldn't know what to expect. But he mitigates the risk by planning, by data, and then he takes the company or his enterprise forward. A perfect example that I would quote here is the case of Uber. Uber is the most successful company that connected a service with customers, with no middlemen. So all of the components of his business were existing. There were taxis before, there were drivers before, there were vehicles existing before, and there were riders or customers who wanted those services, but nobody actually put together that system where everything fit together and it became a very manageable, successful, commercially viable business model. And why? Because he had X-ray vision. Entrepreneurs have acute hearing. He's a Superman, right? So he can hear what others cannot easily hear. His ears are so sharp that he picks up signals from a mile away. Now, what does it mean? It simply means he's a very good listener. Any entrepreneur is a very good listener. He is forever listening to all around him, his team, his stakeholders, his investors, his community, but most importantly, his customers. Listening sharpens his accurate and deep understanding of his business. Now, a business is all about giving something, right? Like giving a product or a service to someone, a customer, who finds value in it and is willing to pay a price for it. Therefore, it is very critical for a business to have deep insights on their customers. Customer insight is all about analyzing data to better understand your customers. That will help you make better decisions about how, when, and what to sell them. Now, these better decisions will result in campaigns or strategies becoming more effective, more efficient, and eventually it will result in profitability. That's a continuous process. And for the continuous process, a business, an entrepreneur, should be continuously listening and then taking action on it. An example that I would draw is Southwest Airlines. I don't know how many of you know this, but Southwest Airlines is considered to be the pioneer of budget airlines. You might know the other budget airline that probably are all familiar because it's closer to us, AirAsia. But Southwest Airlines started this. So at a time when flying was extremely expensive and it was the prerogative of very affluent people who could afford airline tickets, what they did is they listened to their customers and they realized there are a lot more customers out there who wants to fly and they're willing to pay they're willing to take they're willing to pay a ticket for much less comfort if they can get from point A to point B. They listen to their customers and they realize it is not important to give them first-class treatment all the time. It is not important to give them really wide seats all the time. It is not important for them to have alcohol in the flights. It is important for them to get from point A to point B as efficiently as possible. They listen to the customers and they made their business model, they tweaked their business model, and budget airlines were born. And as AirAsia would tell you, now everyone can fly. Why? Because that entrepreneur had acute hearing. He could hear what others couldn't. Now, how many of you know, if I say the name Wally West? But if a lot of you might know him if I were to refer to him as Flash from DC Comics. Why is he a Superman? Why is he superhuman? Because his singular power is his ability to move faster than anything imaginable. Agility is the key. Now, this is also a power that entrepreneurs need, because in business, there is nothing called as cast in stone. There is nothing called as a constant. The only constant that you would probably have, so some people might say the only constant is change, but I would say the only constant in any entrepreneur and any enterprise would be your integrity. Your integrity as an individual, your integrity as a businessman, your integrity as a business. Everything else will change. The ability to survive and sustain, therefore, is paramount on your ability to adapt to change and as quickly as possible. It's your sustain and last in business. How is that important in business? I would again take you through an example, which probably is known to everyone. The Kodak story. It is the most cliched stories in this scenario. Now, I do not know how many of you know this story, but then for those who do not, I will quickly tell you what happened between these companies. Kodak and Fujifilm at one point in time were the biggest companies in the world of photography. This was a time when photography was, and probably a lot of you in this audience might not even have seen a film camera. I'm not sure, but when I was a kid, all the cameras were had films, and you had to take a photograph on a film and process the film, and that's how you used to get your photographs. Now, Kodak was even in the forefront of this business model. They were even ahead in terms of how they'd done their business, because they were not just leveraging on their expertise as a filmmaker, as a photography filmmaker. What they did is they used to sell cameras at a very low price to hook the photographers, the cinematographers, the movie makers, etc., so that they would eventually come back to them to buy their film. So they were ahead in business model. They were really, really successful business. But then what happened is they were not agile, because they couldn't read the writing on the wall. They couldn't see that the film photography was about to die. Digital photography was about to take the world on. In fact, although Kodak had the first digital camera built by them, they didn't think that it was something that would come in fast. Fujifilm, on the other hand, although they were in the exact same business, they were agile. They could read the writings on the wall. They knew the digital photography was going to take over the world. And if they had to survive, they had to be agile, and they had to diversify, and they had to find other business models that would help them survive. So they modified. Result, in less than a decade, Kodak became almost bankrupt, and Fujifilms became a completely different successful company. From photography films, they went on to become an LCD manufacturer. You see how that agility helped. Now, This is another example probably that might be relatable to most of you in the audience. Everyone knows Netflix, and you probably, if you know the history, you would know that Netflix did not start as a company as it is known today. They were agile, and they were able to leverage on their agility and become one of the most successful unicorns in the world. I mean, I think if you do not know about this story, probably this is a time where you can go and research on that story. The next superpower. This is also something which I really like and I believe in. Not that I don't believe in the rest, but this is something which I really keep close to my heart. Supermen would have super friends. Now, guys, I need to have a caveat here. When I talk about supermen and I refer to them as he, etc., I'm not being gender biased. It is just easy to say, but whenever I say men, I also mean women. When I say he, I also refer to she. I mean, that's something that I would want to clarify, in case somebody would take offense on that. So anyway, coming back, supermen would always have super friends. Why? Because entrepreneurship is a very long, lonely journey. Do not get me wrong. I mean, I am on the 5th cycle of my entrepreneurial journey today. And this dictum has held true for me every single time. Because it is not always that you will find people who believe in your journey and your vision. There will always be naysayers. There will always be people who doubt you, who would think that you would fail. But that's okay. That's all right. What is even more important is to have people who do not judge you for your choices. Unfortunately, our society is wired in a way that does not often happen that way, right? You will be judged, you will be criticized, you will be rebutted. You will lose friends, you will lose family until probably you become successful. Different people would have different stories to say, but then I am sure most entrepreneurs would agree with me on this. What that really means is, I don't want to sound negative. What it really means is entrepreneurial journey is not an easy one. It is not easy to convince everybody. And it is not easy to rally everyone that you love or like around you to have the same vision. And that is okay. Because an entrepreneur must be hardy. He should have the mental faculties in believing in himself. He should be able to hold against rebuttals and being ignored by people that matter to you. But the point I'm trying to make here is not that. The point I'm trying to make here is something that is positive, because one of the most profound statements ever made was by a guy called Jim Rohn, who is a motivational speaker of our early generation. And he said, you are the average of 5 people you spend most time with. I think that is very important, particularly for entrepreneurs, for him to have that mental hardiness. He should surround himself with people that matter. Because we are all influenced by people around us. And if you happen to be the smartest guy in the room most of the time, then it isn't good for you. Because you need smart or smarter people than you who can counter you, who can question you, give negative feedback, and thus give you a fillip to your progress, to your thinking, and to your decisions. They'll only make you better. So they do this without judging you. And they do not have an underlying vested interest in making those comments. So that's the kind of people that you should be surrounding yourself with. People who are smarter than you, people who do not judge you, people who criticize you, and people do not say yes all the time to everything that you say. If you doubt, this is probably one of the most powerful and most successful friendships that you know. Warren Buffett and Bill Gates. Coming to the last superpower that I believe in. An entrepreneur is humble. To me, this is above all the other superpowers. None of the other superpowers are really powerful enough as the 7th one. It is also probably the most underrated in any one of the textbooks on leadership, entrepreneurship that you might be reading. But humility is one of the most powerful and important attributes of growth, both in and out of the ring. Being humble helps to build trust and facilitates learning, which are key aspects of leadership and personal development. The problem is, science finds it difficult to define a metric for measuring humility. But I, therefore, would attribute humility to these. An entrepreneur is humble because he knows that he doesn't have everything right. He doesn't know it all. He knows the difference between self-confidence and being proud. And he's always seeking to add value to others and to add value to the product or service that he's building. He always takes responsibility for his actions and his decisions. An important one, he understands the darker side of success. People are quick to accolade success when an entrepreneur becomes successful, but what they claim as success is only the tip of the iceberg above the water. An entrepreneur knows what that success is attributed to and what beneath that murky waters that holds the success high. And the last one, he's forever grateful for what he has. And I would go on to say that it is not about just what he has, it is also about who he has along with him. Because there is no entrepreneur in the world who would have made it to success, if you can define success, by himself. There would be somebody who would have supported him. There would be a customer who would have believed in him. There would have been a team member who has taken the brunt for his decisions. There will be many people around him who would have supported him and propped him to be where he is. And so therefore, gratitude is an important attribute to any entrepreneur. And you know the best leader. I wouldn't call it as him as an entrepreneur, but a leader with humility. He kept the things simple. He held the people together, and he achieved success by rallying them together. So coming back to reality, am I a Superman being an entrepreneur? Maybe, maybe not. I'm not so sure. But what is more important is that I understand these values of an entrepreneurship, and I'm always striving to better that, and always mindful of these values that should be attributed to my success. Thank you. Leah, I think you're on mute.
Okay. So it is clear from, thank you so much, sir, for such a wonderful session. So it is clear from what we just heard that having exposure.
I can't hear you.
Sir, am I audible? Hello?
I don't know about
Hello,
others.
sir?
Maybe others can.
You're audible.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes, Leah, you're audible. You may continue.
Okay. So thank you so much, sir, for such a wonderful session. It is clear from what we just heard that having exposure to both sides of the equation is important to become a successful entrepreneur. And it is no doubt that you are a superman, sir. So we got some questions. So we'll be moving on to the questions. Um, First question, it is by Joseph Joan Panikar. It is that, is it necessary for an entrepreneur to be technically sound? This is the question, sir.
Thank you, John, for asking that question. So this attributes to one of the points that I actually spoke about, right? I mean, he needs to deep dive. Whilst it is almost impossible for anybody to be an expert in everything, and it is about, if it is a product, then it is about what the product is, how do you make the product, even if it is a manufacturing thing, how you manufacture it, what is the machinery, how do you brand it, what are the marketing strategies that you would have, what are the selling techniques that you would use, what are the logistics that you would take advantage of. So a business is all about different silos of information, different silos of knowledge coming together. And it is impossible for any entrepreneur to be an expert in all of this. But what is important is that there are two things. There is something that is a core for any business, right? If you are an entrepreneur who is building, okay, I'll take Elon Musk's example. If he is building a electric car, the core of the electric car is about the batteries, the fuel cells, right? And if that is the case, he may not be a fuel cell scientist for sure, but he would know enough about fuel cells, enough about how the fuel cells are made, how they can be more efficient, what are the things that would make a fuel cell more cost effective, etc. So he would I'm sure he would qualify nearly as a qualified fuel cell scientist, because that is the core of his business. And any business you take that way, the entrepreneur should understand the core of his business as almost as good as the expert on it. I hope I have answered your question.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir, for answering that question. The next one is by Amrita BJ. She asked that, what do you think is important for a student startup in college? Like with academics playing a role in one side, how do you think they can become successful entrepreneurs?
Leah, your last sentence I couldn't hear because you broke off. Would you mind repeating it?
Yes, sir. Like with academics playing a role on one side, how do you think they can become a successful entrepreneurs? Like, what do you think is important for a student startup in college?
Tricky question. Is, my answer, some of your professors, if they are on this, may not like it. But I can tell you this. You could dabble in something on the side if you're interested. And that is not entrepreneurship. If you are doing two things at the same time, then one of them is critical to you. The other one is just a feel-good factor. It is at the most a hobby. So if you are a serious entrepreneur, then the only thing that you could possibly do is just that. So it is very hard for you to be a student and an entrepreneur at the same time. I'm not saying this as a cast in stone rule. I'm sure there may be exceptions out there, but by and large, it is very hard for somebody to focus on two things. So there are two choices for you. One, you continue your being a student, but if you're sure that is the line that you're going to, you have a specific business in mind, you have a specific idea, then use that your student days to garner knowledge, to go deeper into that subject and be prepared very well to be an entrepreneur once you finish with your studies. That is one thing. That one way. Second is, of course, to drop out of college and focus on entrepreneurship. But in my opinion, I don't think it is possible to be two at the same time and give justice to both.
Okay, sir. Thank you so much, sir, for answering that. I think there is time for one more question. So shall I ask you the question?
No, I'm here.
It's by Anand Mahadev. He asked that, is it like think locally, act globally, or vice versa?
It's a very good question. Business is all about market is defines your success eventually. So if you are talking about, there is a reason why MIT has defined SMEs with SMEs as businesses with a smaller focus. It is because SMEs always hit a cap, always hit a cap. If you are, let's take, for example, city of Trivandrum, and you are coming up, let's say you want to start a business of selling, I don't know, maybe selling mineral water to this town, right? And you have something really special kind of mineral water, which probably make everyone young, I don't know. But some business that you want to start. But if you define your market as Trivandrum, then there is a limit to which you can sell to, because the city of Trivandrum has only a certain number of people. It will have only a certain limited number of people who can afford your product. And before you know, there would be competitors who would start knowing and taking away your market share with a similar kind of product in the same market. So the only way a business can grow and sustain and continue that growth is by really expanding your market size. And so therefore, the dictum that you're saying, the phrase that you're using, think locally and go global, it makes sense in one way. I mean, you have to think globally for defining your market size, because you need to be able to grow your business more and more and more. But thinking local becomes important, because thinking locally is the only way where you can actually listen to your customer, right? You can't listen to your customer globally because your customers are speaking different languages, they have different cultures, they have different ways of doing things. You can't have a global listening, right? You have to listen as close as to the ground as possible. So when you talk about thinking locally, you're essentially referring to hitting the ground to understand your customers. And that goes for every market that you go into. But that doesn't mean that you can multiply that globally from what you have learned from one market. You need to be able to go to different markets, listen to that, and then expand globally. Hope I have answered your question.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So the next question is by Varun S. Muralidharan. He said, how can a budding entrepreneur survive during these uncertain times?
How can a budding entrepreneur survive
during these uncertain times?
Good question. I have a few rules, I would say. First rule is be very, very frugal, right? And you need to be frugal in your spending. You do not spend on what that is not needed. Keep your cash as close to you as possible, because what is happening here at the moment is these troubled times is that no one knows when it is going to end. No one knows how it is going to turn around. Everybody has guesses, everybody has theories, but nobody is sure. So, and because the future is so uncertain, you need to be able to hold on to those definitives that you have. And one thing is for sure, cash is king. You need to keep your money closer to your heart. That is the first thing that I would tell you. Second is, you need to really look at the market. You need to listen to the market and understand what is going on. Has the needs of the market changed? In my business, I know our product was launched 3 weeks before the COVID lockdown. And I know how the market has changed before Corona and after Corona. The things that they expect from our product has changed, and we had to pivot, we had to be agile, and we had to change, we had to adapt. So you need to be agile, you need to listen to your customers closely, and you need to be willing to pivot. No matter how good you think your idea is, if the market doesn't need it, you don't have a business. So keep the money close to you, be agile, listen to your market.
Okay, sir, one last question. It is by Rachel. How can entrepreneur handle his company at the same time as family? How to overcome the dogma of starting a business when in a family?
I'm not sure if I'm qualified to answer that because I have struggled with that. But I can say generically that your family is probably the most important thing that you have, other than your enterprise. And it is very important for you to balance that. It is very important to, no, actually it is not just your family. There are 3 things that you need to take care of. One is your enterprise, your business. The next one is yourself. And the third is your family. So unless you find a balance to take care of all the 3, you're going to be in trouble. So there is no magic formula for that, unfortunately. It is up to you, to your working style, to your kind of business, but you need to be able to find that balance and allocate adequate time for all of them.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much for coming to Catalyst Chats. That was a really inspiring and thoughtful session. Thank you so much, sir. By this, we came to the end of today's session. I thank all of you who have tuned in to today's Catalyst Chats, sparing your valuable time and listening to us. And this is not the end for Catalyst Chats. Tomorrow at the same time, the same platform, we'll be coming with another speaker.